I'm Dr. Robert Van Howe, the Medical Director of the Dickinson Iron District Health Department and the Western Upper Peninsula Health Department. I'm going to give a presentation on maternal smoking in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. My interest was piqued about this topic when I was preparing the Upper Peninsula Community Health Needs Assessment. I found that in 2016, the national maternal smoking rate was 7.19%. In the state of Michigan, it was 10.4% in 2019, while in the Upper Peninsula, it was 28.6% the same year, and it wasn't really clear why the rate was double in the Upper Peninsula. Our data source for maternal smoking comes from birth certificates. On the birth certificate application, mothers are asked if they had any tobacco use during pregnancy. They're also asked the number of cigarettes smoked prior to pregnancy and during each of the trimesters during pregnancy. This information is stored at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Division of Vital Statistics. When we do studies, we oftentimes look at a sample of the entire population to get an idea of what's happening in the rest of the population. That's the little white ball in the figure on the right. But with birth certificates, we have information on every birth. So basically, the target population and the sample are identical. As a result, we don't have any sampling bias. By having the data for every live birth in the state of Michigan, we have a great advantage here. The sample, the sampling frame, and the target population are all the same. This is different than when we do most population estimates. In most population estimates, we have a sample taken from the population at large, which is the little white circle in the figure on the right. And what we try to do is infer what we gather from that small sample and see if it applies to the entire population. Hopefully, the smaller sample reflects the population as a whole. The disadvantages that we have is it relies on the person completing the birth certificate to understand what they're being asked and to provide an honest response. So basically, this is called social desirability bias, where people tell us what they think we want to hear rather than telling the truth. Also, the question may be outdated. There are no questions regarding e-cigarettes or vaping. Many do not consider vaping to be tobacco use, and vaping has been marketed as a safer alternative to cigarettes, even though that's probably not true. The bottom line is that nicotine is the drug that impacts the fetus, and nicotine is delivered both by cigarettes and by vaping. E-cigarettes are a drug delivery device that is not regulated as a drug delivery device, and there's an interesting, complicated history that goes with this. So here's what I looked at. I looked at maternal smoking rates by race at the county level for each year from 2002 through 2021. I also looked at statewide smoking rates by race to be used for comparison. We know that smoking rates can be related to other demographic factors, so I also looked at the average household income for each Upper Peninsula county, as well as the percentage of the population with a bachelor's degree or higher in each of the counties. I did univariate and multivariate linear regression. The dependent factor was the maternal smoking rate as a percentage. The independent variables I looked at were county of residence, year of birth, and the percentage within the county who had a bachelor's degree or higher. I also weighted by the number of births in each county. If you don't do this, the maternal smoking rates in Keweenaw County will have the same weight as the percentage in Marquette County. You also have to be aware of collinearity. In a multivariate analysis, if two variables are included that measure the same thing, it makes the statistical model unstable. In our situation, we know that education and income are related, as noted in the figure on the right. As the percentage of those with a bachelor's degree or higher goes up, average household income also goes up. We also know that county residents' income level and education level are related to each other, so you have to use caution in having these terms all in the same models. I have a picture of a three-legged stool to illustrate this. If you take one of the legs and move it closer and closer to one of the other legs, the stool becomes unstable. The same thing is true as if you have three factors and two of them are measuring just about the same thing. I started with the numbers that were more readily available, and that was in those who identify as white. The statewide maternal smoking rate in 2021 was 11.79%. In the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, it was 21.59%. I also looked at the 20-year cumulative rates, and it was 25.16% in the Upper Peninsula. When we look at the cumulative rates at the county levels, they range from 20.87 and 21.31% in Keweenaw and Houghton counties to a high of 35.53% in Luce County. When we look at average maternal smoking rates as they relate to average household income, we found that there were significant differences in the smoking rates by counties. Whether we look at the 20-year cumulative or the year-to-year county levels, there was a negative correlation with the county level average of household income. So as household income went down, the maternal smoking rates went up. So that for each $10,000 increase in average household income, the maternal smoking rate decreased by 5.2%. Looked at the same thing with educational level. As the percentage of those who had a bachelor's degree or higher increased, the maternal smoking rate decreased, and this was a statistically significant finding. For each 10% increase in those having a bachelor's degree or higher, the maternal smoking rate decreased by 4.37%. Then we looked at the year-to-year trend to see if there was a change over time. When we looked for a linear trend year-to-year, we found that there was a positive correlation that was statistically significant. The problem with this is that there was enough data to show a statistically significant finding, but it may not reflect what's going on. By looking for just a linear relationship, we were able to find what we were looking for, and that's called a confirmation bias. There's a couple of problems with the linear relationship. The first is that not all the counties had a positive linear relationship. 3 of the counties, Alger, Delta, and Houghton counties, all had a significant increase over time in the maternal smoking rates, but 11 counties did not show any relationship. These included Ontonagon and Mackinac County on the figure here. And in fact, in Dickinson County, they had a significant decrease in maternal smoking rates over time. That tells us that our significant trend may not be a linear relationship. The other thing that we can look at for you statistical nerds out there are residuals. If you look at these plots, you notice that the little dots are not right on the line. There's a distance between the dots and the line. If you take the distance from the dots to the lines, this should be pretty evenly distributed. But if you look at the residuals, this is not the case. On the left-hand side is the distance from the best line of the bachelor's or degree or higher, and you see that's pretty evenly distributed. When you look at the graph on the right, you see that for year to year, the distance from the best line is not evenly distributed, but there's a big gap in the center there. So if you take the average maternal smoking rate each year between 2002 and 2021, you see that the rates went up and then they came down. This does not really show that there's a straight line, but there's kind of a hump in it. What's also of interest is around the time of the peak of maternal smoking rates is also the time that vaping started. If we look for a nonlinear exponential factor to draw a better line to explain our points, we find that the year-to-year data is not linear and that there's an exponential factor that was statistically significant, and it fits the data better but does not overfit the data. Also performed multivariate analysis where we looked for the best model that included significant factors such as year of birth, the year exponential or the nonlinear factor, the average household income, and the percentage with a bachelor's degree or higher. It was also demonstrated the county of residence was collinear with income and education levels, and adding that to the multivariate analysis only confused things. Also looked at the maternal smoking rates among Native Americans. Ran into a few barriers. Native American specific data was only available for Chippewa County. In all the other counties, Native American births were included in all other races. And this was because there were probably not enough of them to fall out into a separate category. And when there's a small number of births such as this, that information is not published for fear of invading someone's privacy. So I used the U.S. Census Bureau data to estimate the number of all other races that would be expected to be Native American. For an example, Houghton County has a high percentage of Asian Pacific Islanders, and they have a maternal smoking rate of 2%, which is much lower than what we'd expect either from whites or Native Americans. By estimating the number of Asian Pacific Islanders and how many of those would be smokers and non-smokers out of the data, we can get a better idea of what the Native American smoking rates are. What I found was the statewide 20-year cumulative average was 35.68% for Native Americans, and the Lower Peninsula was 31.84%, and the Upper Peninsula was 41.36%. When we look at the 20-year cumulative, it ranged from 20% in Houghton County to 61% in Menominee County. There was no association between the average household income in a county and Native American smoking rates, but this would be expected because we don't have the data for the average income for Native American households. Same thing is true with educational level. We didn't find an association, but we also don't have data on the bachelor degree or higher rates for Native Americans. When we look at the Upper Peninsula versus the Lower Peninsula, for the white population, the yearly odds ratios for the 20 years that we looked at range from 1.65 to 2.79. When we look at the 20-year cumulative odds ratio, the maternal smoking rates for whites in the Upper Peninsula were double of what they were for the Lower Peninsula. When we look at the same thing for the Native American population, Native American mothers were only 50% more likely to smoke during pregnancy than those in the Lower Peninsula. When we look at the statewide data, we notice that Native Americans are twice as likely to smoke during pregnancy as those who identified as white. This was better in 2021 than it was over the 20-year cumulative number. We also saw that Native American mothers were twice as likely to smoke than those who identified as white in the Upper Peninsula. Any questions?